We need to be ready, because at the end of this first quarter of the 21st century, conflicts are no longer fought at arm's length. Conflict is at our door. Russia has brought war back to Europe, and we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured. Imagine it, a conflict reaching every home, every workplace. Destruction, mass mobilization, millions displaced, widespread suffering and extreme losses. It is a terrible thought. But if we deliver on our commitments, this is a tragedy we can prevent. NATO is here to protect 1 billion people on both sides of the Atlantic.
This is my video update on this Friday afternoon, December the 12th, coming to you from Athens, Greece. Let's talk about some news. And let's start things off with Mark Rutte, the NATO CEO, who gave a speech yesterday warning that NATO needs to prepare for a war with Russia. Rutte said that Russia is empire building again. They are back to empire building, Russia. Not NATO. NATO's not empire building. The US is not empire building. It is Russia that is empire building again. Rutte said again, they are empire building. He also started to talk about destruction, displacement, chaos in the run-up to a war with Russia. Rutte said, imagine the destruction. Imagine the displacement. Imagine the chaos. And he was going on and on about a war with Russia. Just imagine how devastating a war with Russia would be. The death and destruction. But Rutte said, it can be prevented. He said, we can prevent this. As NATO, if we act now, we can prevent the Russian Empire. But NATO has to be ready. That was Rutte's message. We need to be ready. Russia has brought war back to Europe, and we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured. That French commander, the French general, in his speech a couple of weeks ago, said the same thing, pretty much the same thing. People of France, be prepared to send your sons and daughters, your children, to war and to die. People of France need to be ready to send their children off to war to die. That is what that French commander said in a speech a couple of weeks ago, and now you have the NATO CEO talking about how Russia has brought war back to Europe. And we need to prepare for the scale of war of our grandparents and great-grandparents, what they had to endure. What about the grandparents and the great-grandparents of Russia, of the Russian people during World War II, Pinocchio Rutte? Don't need to talk about that, because according to Kaja Kallas and the foreign minister of Finland, it's Russia that has invaded 19 countries in the last 100 years, right? It's Russia that's empire building again. Let's not talk about the 2014 coup. Let's not talk about Libya and Syria and Iraq and Serbia. NATO wasn't empire building when they tore Yugoslavia apart and they bombed Serbia for 75 days and nights. Now, that wasn't empire building. Let's not talk about that. Serbia in Europe? Yes, it is. Yes, it is, but it's Russia that has brought war back to Europe. Or what about the 10 years when Ukraine was shelling the Donbass from 2014 up to 2022-23? Let's not talk about that. Anyway, that's Rutte. That was his speech warning about war with Russia. Everyone's talking about Rutte's crazy fear-mongering, give NATO money speech. And I'm certain that's what this is mostly about, is to continue the flow of funds into NATO. After all, he is the CEO of NATO. That's his job, to raise money for NATO to keep the business going. So that's what most of this is about. But if you go by what Orban has been saying, Europe is absolutely preparing for a war with Russia by 2030. According to Orban, this is EU policy, is to go to war with Russia by 2030. Some reports claim that the United States wants Europe to go to war with Russia by 2027, but Europe is saying that they're not going to be ready by 2027, and they need more time to prepare for a conflict with Russia. So yes, this could be about money. This definitely is about money for the MIC and for NATO, revenue for the NATO business. But this is also about war. This is also about a conflict with Russia. Given the situation of the countries in the collective West, the economic and social situation, but mostly the economic, financial situation of the countries in the collective West, the situation in the front lines in Ukraine, I get the sense that the leaders of the collective West have come to the conclusion that the only option is to build up for a war with Russia. How else can they keep the grift going, and how else can they cover over the financial and economic decay that they themselves have brought upon their countries, their individual countries, only through a conflict? So that is Rutte. Ireland, the neutral, the one-time neutral country of Ireland, they are investing 1.7 billion in war, in the military. They're going to build up their defenses, 1.7 billion over the next 5 years. And they're going to start right away with 19 million to purchase drones. They're going to purchase the drones because of the drones that were buzzing around the skies of Dublin last week as Zelensky was landing in Ireland, of which the air traffic controllers, it's my understanding, reading various reports, that the air traffic controllers in Dublin were not even made aware of the fact that there were Russian drones in the skies. They were not notified of the Russian drones, but the story is that there were drones in the skies of Dublin as Zelensky was approaching the city, approaching to land in Ireland. And of course, they're suggesting that this is all part of Russia's hybrid attacks, sending drones into Europe. And so you got to purchase drones now. Got to purchase those drones, and also 1.7 billion to the MIC. And next week we're going to have the big EU Council meeting, and the discussion will be about drones, about dealing with hybrid attacks. The European Union spending more on their military, spending more on drones, on dealing with drones, and also Project Ukraine, of course. Those are going to be the topics that are going to be discussed at the EU Council meeting that is going to take place next week. They're not going to discuss anything about the EU, the EU economies, the EU people, the EU society. Who cares? It's all about Ukraine and the MIC. That is all Europe discusses anymore. And so the Wall Street Journal is saying that the United States and Europe, they're disagreeing on how to use the Russian frozen assets. So I'll get to the update on the Russian frozen assets in a bit, but the Wall Street Journal is saying that the United States and the EU, they are not in agreement as to how to use the Russian frozen assets. How are we going to use the money that we steal? That's what they're arguing about, how to use it. The United States wants to use those Russian frozen assets to invest in Ukraine and for business reasons. And the European Union, they want to use those Russian frozen assets to build up Ukraine's defenses. So that's the disagreement there, fighting over someone else's cash. The pirates of the European Union and the US. I believe Trump had a phone call yesterday with the big three. And according to Trump's statements, the call was pretty tense. Did Trump call the big three? I read that he called the big three, and it was a tense call, and that Trump is urging the Europeans to put pressure on Zelensky to get him to accept his peace plan. I don't even know what peace plan we're talking about anymore, to be quite honest. Are we talking about the 28-point peace plan? Are we talking about the 20-point peace plan? Are we talking about the 19-point peace plan? What peace plan are we even talking about anymore? I don't know. But Trump is putting pressure on the Europeans to put pressure on Zelensky to accept the peace plan, right? Whatever. Just accept any peace plan. Just accept it. I like it. I like it. I need you to accept it. Come on. Just accept it. Turkey is also urging the Europeans to put pressure on the Green Goblin to accept the peace plan. Turkey, of course, wants a freeze. Turkey probably wants a freeze more than the United States, because the last thing Turkey wants is for Russia to control a huge chunk of the Black Sea. So Turkey is definitely in favor of the freeze in the conflict. The last thing they want to see is Russia advancing further west and taking over control of Odessa and the Black Sea. That would spook Turkey. So they're also urging the Europeans to force Zelensky to accept whatever peace plan we're even talking about. The freeze peace plan, I imagine, is what we're talking about, because that is what the peace plan is. It's a freeze. The freeze, DMZ Korea style peace plan. I believe Putin, he is meeting with Erdogan, or he concluded a meeting with Erdogan in Turkmenistan. And we don't have many details as to what they were going to discuss or what they have discussed. They didn't speak to the media before the meeting, so everything's a bit hush-hush with the meeting between Putin and Erdogan, but don't trust Erdogan. Because the last thing that Erdogan wants to see is Russians in Odessa. Erdogan does not want Russia to advance any further, so he is definitely going to be pushing for a freeze to the conflict. And that brings us to the Russian frozen assets, since we're talking about about a freeze. Let's talk about the frozen Russian assets. And we got the news today that the European Union, the ambassadors of the EU, they have voted to permanently freeze the Russian frozen assets. They've granted emergency powers to the Commission, Article 122. That is what they're basing this on, and it grants the emergency powers to Ursula, and the Commission can now move to permanently freeze the Russian frozen assets. No threat from Hungary or Slovakia vetoing the sanctions packages, which would then lead to vetoing the rollover of the Russian sanctions packages, which would then force the European Union to release the Russian frozen assets, to give those Russian frozen assets back to Moscow. That is no longer a threat or a worry, because you now have the Russian frozen assets removed from the sanctions vote, and they will now be permanently frozen. And to unfreeze the Russian frozen assets will now require a unanimous vote. To unfreeze the assets will require a unanimous vote, because the Commission has emergency powers. All that was needed to permanently freeze the Russian assets was a majority vote. So you see what Ursula and her crew did. They rigged it so that a majority vote was all that was needed to permanently freeze the assets, and they've made it so that a unanimous vote is now needed to unfreeze the assets, which basically equates to a forever confiscation, to a forever freeze and a confiscation of the 140 billion, or however much the assets are sitting in Euroclear. 140 billion, 180 billion, 250 billion. The number changes every week. EU set to indefinitely freeze Russian assets, removing obstacle to Ukraine loan. The European Union has agreed to indefinitely immobilize the assets of the Russian Central Bank, a central element of the reparations loan to Ukraine, still under intense negotiations ahead of a make-or-break summit next week. By doing so, the EU locks in the assets under its jurisdiction for the foreseeable future, amid fears that the United States might seek control of the Russian funds and use them in future settlement with Moscow to end the war. The long-term immobilization was agreed by ambassadors on Thursday afternoon, under Article 122 of the EU treaties, which only requires a qualified majority from member states and bypasses the European Parliament. And it bypasses the European Parliament. Democracy in action. So what does Orban have to say about all of this? What does Orban have to say? Because Hungary was duped. They were fooled. They were duped. Remember, a year ago, I did a video where I talked about how Hungary would go along with renewing the sanctions as long as the vote would take place every 6 months. This included the Russian frozen assets. Hungary said, "Okay, look, we'll go along, and this time around, this was a year ago, we'll go along this time around and roll over the sanctions and roll over the frozen assets. But in the next 6 months, we need to examine this. And then in the 6 months after that, we need to examine the sanctions and the freezing of the Russian assets." And that's what Hungary thought it was getting into. That's what it thought the process was going to be. And so it would go along with the sanctions voting, as long as it was understood that every 6 months it would vote on sanctions plus the Russian frozen assets. Well, Hungary's been duped. Ursula has played Orban. She has removed the frozen assets from the sanctions vote. Take that, Victor. So Orban posted on X, Today, the Brusselians are crossing the Rubicon. At noon, a written vote will take place that will cause irreparable damage to the Union. The subject of the vote is the frozen Russian assets, on which the EU member states have so far voted every 6 months and adopted a unanimous decision. With today's procedure, the Brusselians are abolishing the requirement of unanimity with a single stroke of the pen, which is clearly unlawful. With today's decision, the rule of law in the European Union comes to an end, and Europe's leaders are placing themselves above the rules. Instead of safeguarding compliance with the EU treaties, the European Commission is systematically raping European law. It is doing this in order to continue the war in Ukraine, a war that clearly isn't winnable. All this is happening in broad daylight, less than a week before the meeting of the European Council, the Union's most important decision-making body, bringing together heads of state and government. With this rule of law in the European Union is being replaced by the rule of bureaucrats. In other words, a Brusselian dictatorship has taken hold. Hungary protests this decision and will do everything in its power to restore lawful order. So Orban is 100% spot on. The bureaucrats, the kleptocrats, they have taken over. They have seized power and taken over in the European Union. And what this is going to do is this is going to lead to financial collapse. Maybe it will take a couple of years to see the effects of what has been done by Ursula and co. Maybe it'll take 5 years or 10 years for the effects to show. But make no mistake about it, the countries and investors that have their money in the European Union will be looking at this decision, this granting of emergency powers and this confiscation of Russian assets, which is what this is, a confiscation of Russian assets, by changing the laws and the articles, and they're gonna take their money out. That's exactly what's going to happen. It may not be right away, it may not be all at once, but the money is going to leave Europe because it's just too risky. It's going to leave the European Union because it's just too risky to keep your money in the EU after a decision like this. And Moscow, my understanding is that Russia and the Kremlin, Moscow is already starting legal procedures. So they're going to go after Euroclear. They're going to go after Belgium and the European Union. Not in Europe. They're going to go to other jurisdictions. And they're going to go after Euroclear and Belgium to recoup the losses, the money that has been illegally frozen indefinitely, illegally indefinitely frozen. And Russia's going to win. Russia's going to win every single freaking case because they even have the Prime Minister of Belgium on record saying that this is not legal and it's freaking stupid and we should definitely not do this. But there you have it. And what spooked Europe the most? What spooked Europe the absolute most? I said this a couple of weeks ago when I read that 28-point peace plan. Nothing in that 28-point peace plan bothered the EU because it was completely tilted towards Ukraine. Forget about what the media says. The 28-point peace plan is a gift to Russia. It was no gift to Russia. It was a gift to the Green Goblin, that 28-point peace plan, the original 28-point peace plan. But the part that really, really spooked the Europeans was that one clause in the peace plan, which said that the United States is going to get the frozen assets and is going to benefit from the profit of the frozen assets. That spooked Europe. And that is what is prompting the EU to invoke these emergency powers and to freeze the assets indefinitely. They're going to say that they're freezing the assets indefinitely because this gives them leverage over Russia and blah, 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 whatever. That's BS. They're doing this because they were worried that the Trump White House negotiating with Russia would reach some sort of a conclusion and those Russian frozen assets would make their way to the United States, and they would benefit from the Russian frozen assets. That's what this is really all about. What is up here? What is that? Let's go check it out. So that is an update there. Game over, EU, game over, game over. So Zelensky, he is proposing a referendum. That's his latest shtick. Zelensky, he is proposing a referendum on territory. He is now saying, you know what, if we're going to agree to some sort of territorial loss, and when he means territorial loss, he means turning the 20% of Donbass into a DMZ. That is what he is defining as territorial loss, in accordance with the plans that have been presented to us. Anyway, he is saying that Ukraine needs to vote on this. The people of Ukraine need to vote on this, and he is calling for a referendum. So the narrative from Zelensky is, we cannot hold elections for president because we're at war, right? We can't hold elections, not possible because we're at war, but we can definitely hold a referendum on the territory. And everyone sees this for what it is. It's Zelensky just trying to buy more time. That's all he's trying to do. He's trying to buy more time, and they're just trying to sabotage whatever negotiations are taking place between the United States and Russia. So Bloomberg has an article with the title, Zelensky floats referendum over territory as U.S. seeks deal. And Dmitry Medvedev, he posted on X, the junkie Führer straight up gave the White House the finger. Everyone understands that a terrorist referendum in Ukraine will stall negotiations. That's exactly what the Kiev clown is after. How much longer will you put up with this, America? Yeah, stall negotiations, buy some time. That's it. If you buy into the narrative that the United States and the Trump administration is negotiating with Russia in good faith, that they really do want a fair end to the conflict, an end which takes Russia's interests into consideration and is based on the realities on the ground and on June 2024 Istanbul Plus. If you believe that, then yeah, you can believe that what we are seeing is a Green Goblin play at buying some time. Not only are we talking about a referendum on territory, but we also got the news that there is talk of a special economic zone. A special economic zone. That is what they are now naming the DMZ. I've been calling it a DMZ. Trump's original 28-point peace plan called it a DMZ. But now they're calling it a special economic zone. That is what it is being called now. The interesting part to this story is that we're getting conflicting reports as to who came up with this special economic zone. It's just the DMZ. That's what we're talking about, the DMZ, the 20% in Trump's peace plan that remains in Donbass, that Russia has not captured in Donbass, but they will capture it in Donetsk. They're going to capture that 20%. But for the moment, It has not been captured, and what the Trump White House floated out in their 28-point peace plan was that this 20% becomes a demilitarized zone. And now we're getting the reports that that someone is saying, you know what, let's just turn this into a special economic zone so that we can have business and investments and whatever. So the Green Goblin was in a meeting talking about all of these plans with Kushner, Witkoff, and take a guess who else? BlackRock. Larry Fink from BlackRock was also sitting in on this meeting, a video meeting with Zelensky. What did I say yesterday in my video update as I was talking about the three-letter agency plan that they're floating out there? BlackRock wants to get involved. They want to resurrect their $400 billion investment fund into Ukraine that they once had on the table a couple of years ago, and then they pulled it back. It looks like BlackRock is now saying, you know what, we want back in the Ukraine grift. So BlackRock was sitting in on this meeting. So conflicting reports. Let's get back to the conflicting reports. The BBC is reporting that the U.S. wants a special economic zone in Ukraine's frontline region. And this is according to the Green Goblin. Zelensky says the U.S. wants a special economic zone in Ukraine's frontline region. The U.S. has proposed Ukraine withdraw from the eastern Donetsk region and create a special economic zone in the areas it currently controls, Ukrainian President Zelensky has said. Zelensky said territory and control of the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant remained the two main unresolved issues in the peace plan proposed for Ukraine, the ZNPP going to the United States and this territory issue. So the BBC is saying that the U.S., Zelensky is saying, according to the BBC, that the U.S. has floated out the idea of a special economic zone. Politico is reporting that Ukraine hopes to entice Trump with a free economic zone in latest peace plan. The president has yet to respond to the revised proposal, which suggests that both Russia and Ukraine would vacate a demilitarized zone in the Donbass. So Politico, in their reporting, is saying that this is a Ukraine-Europe idea in order to entice Trump, the creation of an economic zone. Which one is it? That tells me that this has nothing to do with an economic zone or anything like that. This is just about getting a freeze. That's what this means. DMZ, economic zone, it just means a freeze. It means a freeze on the current front line in Donbass. And so they're kind of getting confused. The mainstream media outlets, it seems like they've confused the story. One outlet is saying that Zelensky is saying this is a U.S. idea. Another outlet is saying that this is a Ukraine idea in order to entice Trump. You know, the transactional business president. How are you going to entice him? Let's say that the Donbass becomes a free economic zone that will entice Trump to push for a freeze. It's all about just getting a freeze, stopping Russia's movement, momentum, and getting a freeze. They haven't quite polished, cleared up their messaging yet, as far as this economic zone. They've shifted from a DMZ now to an economic zone, so they've done that. We're no longer talking about a demilitarized zone. We're now going to start talking about an economic zone. It sounds better, an economic zone, right? Because when Russia turns it down, then they can say, oh my God, Russia turned down an economic zone. It was going to be an economic zone with investment and BlackRock. So Russia is advancing, and that is the problem. Everything is a result of what is happening on the front lines. And the latest update is that in Mirnograd, whatever Ukrainian soldiers were holding out in the encircled Mirnograd in the Pokrovsk area, they are now starting to surrender. And we've got the video and the images which show the Ukraine military that was trapped in Mirnograd surrendering. And so Russia's now going to clean up Mirnograd, and that's it for Pakrovsk Mirnograd. That will be the end of that operation, of which Syrskyi is still going on about how Ukraine is actually capturing parts of Pakrovsk. That is what Syrskyi, the delusional Syrskyi, claims. So Bulgaria, the government there has resigned. The government in Bulgaria has decided to call it quits. Another Zelensky curse. Let's chalk up another Zelensky curse for the former Prime Minister, Rosen Zelensky, who announced the resignation of the government. He did meet with Zelensky. I believe he met with Zelensky many times. He was in Kiev, shaking the hand of the Green Goblin. Zelensky curse strikes again. Undefeated. The Zelensky curse. It is undefeated. And so protests in Bulgaria over the past month, maybe even more, big protests taking place in Bulgaria as the government tried to push through a budget, which, from my understanding of things, just highlighted the corruption and would have made the corruption in Bulgaria even worse. And so the people, they went out onto the streets day after day, week after week, and they got the government to collapse. I'm not sure what happens now, but this government was only in power for about a year. That's it. And Bulgaria, in just 3-4 weeks, will be going on to the euro. They're going to adopt the euro currency. Bad news for Bulgaria. Very, very bad news for Bulgaria and the people of Bulgaria. Unfortunately, they're going to be moving towards the euro. Things are going to get much, much harder, much worse. Everything's going to get a lot more expensive in Bulgaria. But the top 0.001% and the political class, they're going to be loving it. That's how the euro works. Anyway, let's do a clown world, and we can wrap up this video. Der Spiegel had a cover of their magazine with something. I don't even know what it says, to be quite honest. I'm just looking at the image of Trump and Putin, and it looks like they're carving up Europe. I like it, Mr. Putin. I like it. Carve it up. Carve it up. So yeah, we got that image. We don't even need to know what it says. We get the point. Der Spiegel. We get the point. Putin, Trump, Putin puppet carving up Europe. Okay, keep on going with this fake narrative of Trump is giving everything to Russia so that you can try to fool Russia into going ahead with your freeze, DMZ, economic zone, call it whatever you want plan, right? That's what this is all about. No plan that we've seen, that we've read, is even close to addressing root causes. What else? Kaja Kallas, she is saying that Russia cannot spend more than the EU. The EU is going to win, because the EU is going to be able to outspend Russia. How are they going to do that when the EU is in debt? They are in debt, but they are going to outspend Russia. That's the strategy now, to outspend Russia, which is code for the washing machine to continue to spin. Right? That's what Kaja Kallas is saying. We have a new plan to outspend Russia, so let's put that washing machine on super spin cycle. That's how they're going to win, by outspending Russia. And finally, we have Ursula, who was at some sort of a gala, and she told Politico at this gala that the Trump administration should not meddle in European democracy. That's funny. That's funny. Commission president hits back at U.S. plan to undermine the European orthodoxy it says will lead to a civilizational erasure. It is not on us when it comes to elections to decide who the leader of the country will be, but on the people of this country. That's the sovereignty of the voters, and this must be protected, the European Commission president said in an interview at the Politico 28 gala event in Brussels. Nobody else is supposed to interfere without any question, the Commission chief added in response to a question about the U.S. national security strategy, which was published last week and caused uproar in Europe. Okay, so the event was for the Politico's 28 most powerful people in Europe. That was what this event was about, that Ursula attended, and she's telling the Trump administration to back off in meddling in European democracies. Unless, of course, it's a vote taking place in Romania and the EU does not like the lead candidate, then it's okay to meddle in the elections. But other than that, America, back off, right? Back off. And we know how the European Union defines democracy, right? We talked about this yesterday. It's a bunch of globalists, bureaucrats. They get together in a room and they vote each other into various positions. That's their definition of democracy. Well, we've seen what they've done with the Russian frozen assets, bypass the European Parliament. Let's just bypass the European Parliament with these Russian frozen assets. Democracy. Democracy, Ursula style. That's the video, everybody. TheDurant.locals.com. We're on X, we're on Rumble, we're on Telegram. Go to the Durant Shop, pick up some merch. I will see everybody tomorrow. Take care.